Ladies and gentlemen, can we take our seats, please? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Sorry about the slow food service, and for those of you who are joining us online, unfortunately that's why we've just had a 10-minute delay now. But we'll start the programme, and as I mentioned prior to lunch, we're delighted to have two speakers for you this afternoon. Firstly, Callum Goodland from Motul, our new lubricant partner, who will talk to you about the history of Motul. I think what's quite interesting is that Motul, from an automotive car perspective, is relatively unknown in the UK, but most definitely has a massive pedigree. They have been the lubricant partner for the French Federation since 2006. And I'm very hopeful that this relationship will have similar longevity as far as the British Federation is concerned. Callum.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank David, the Federation, the board, for appointing us as the official lubricant and oil partner to the FHBBC. We're delighted to be involved with the Federation and the clubs that it represents, and indeed its members going on from there. Historic vehicles and classic cars are something that's very much in the DNA of our company, Motul. In a second, as David's already made reference to, we'll cover some of the history. You'll have to bear with me, I hope I don't bore you too much, but it's something that I think shows a little bit about our heritage and why I think we're probably going to be a very good fit with the Federation and the car clubs in the UK. So I'll go on to the first slide, just to go through some of the history. You can probably see there. Motul as a company was originally formulated in 1853. It was at 44 Water Street, New York City. That was the first headquarters of the company that would go on to become Motul. So you can see at the very start of the oil industry as we know it today. Then in 1854, again in New York, the first Swan and Finch factory, which was one of the early names of the company, was actually founded in South Brooklyn. We were set up by three gentlemen, William T. DeForest, Mayhew Finch and Alden Swan, hence the name Swan and Finch. That was our first sort of company name. And originally it started with, a bit gross, but animal fat, whale and olive oil lubricants. So that was for the textile industry in the US and other early industry when lubricants became very key to the industrial world. It then moved on to industrial oils as we sort of know them more today. And then when black gold was struck, as they say, in Pennsylvania back in 1859, in 1891, Swan and Finch was first incorporated in the US in New York. In 1919, this was when Swan and Finch first actually started to export and first started to sell internationally. So the business really did ramp up very quickly in a short space of time. And you can see some of the early imagery of the factories, the early logo, and these type of things. So at the very, very inset of the oil industry. Some more images to show you a little bit more about the history. Moving on to the 20s, you can see that obviously mechanized agriculture really exploded very quickly, moving away from horse-driven agriculture, and this created a very large and quick and steep demand for quality lubricants for these new pieces of machinery. And in the 1930s, Swan and Finch created a tractor division in Chicago, and this was the first time they called it Motul, and this was the first time that brand name was used. Later on, in 32, Mr. Ernest Zorg founded Suprapen in Paris, and he looked after and had the rights to all of the products from Swan and Finch and indeed Motul, running through France and all the French territories. By 1947, his son Ernest Jr. was the company president, and by 57, just 10 years later, he had the worldwide, he had bought the business and had the worldwide rights to the business that we know today as Motul Oil and Lubricants. Interesting note, the last little stat there, that even today, 21, Motul is still run and owned by the same Zorg family, headquartered in Paris. Our president, Helene Zorg, she lives in London, but it's still 100% family owned. They're very proud of the history and their family connection, and that's something that later on in the presentation I'll tell you a little bit more about. You'll get to meet them on the screen and also see a little bit more about them for the next generation. So just to cover some of the history of Motul, I've just got some very brief slides just to show you some of the history. That's one of the that's Ernest Zorg Jr. there in the top photo. Some of the early agricultural pictures that we've got there. Some of the branding. You can see motorcycle and actual pedestrian cycles as well. We did all the oil and lubricants for those from a very early onset. Moving more into kind of race, motocross, rally. Again, some motorcycle work. You can see some of the historical photos, some of the brand imagery, how the logo changed through the years. This is the early 40s that you can see here. Marine as well covered, so really expanding into all the new developing technologies that came through. Bringing up again a little bit further on in history, you can see the Motul logo at the top, Huile de Motul. That changed the logo again. They got involved with the rallying. You've got the Rally of Monte Carlo. You've got some track work starting to be done, so already getting into the race world and some of the demands of top racing. That was very key to the Motul ethos and how we wanted to get our brand out there known as a very premium product. Bringing it up to kind of the 70s, this is when we started to work with the BRM team, the Owen family, and at the very inset we started working with them, a very successful partnership. You can see there the Henri Pescarolo 1973 BRM race car. That was the only Motul F1 car that we ever got associated with. That was running on Century Oil. That was a particular race oil that was developed that was hugely successful. It added some real time-saving lap that we proved on dyno machines at the time. That gave them the edge, they believed. And an interesting note, that very car is currently in Australia. It's just been purchased by the Owen family from BRM. They're shipping it back over to the UK, and we're actually sponsoring the restoration of that very car. Henri Pescarolo is still an ambassador for Motul to this day, and we're going to get them at Goodwood next year. The plan is to have them reunited, him with his old race car. So a very nice marketing piece, but also I think it shows how Motul as a company from top down, we're passionate about historic and classic vehicles. To date, in the last few years, we've actually saved and preserved over 55 vehicles by sponsoring their restoration around the globe, and it's something that we think is vitally important. Our owners believe in it. We all know that in 2030 regulation is going a certain way for the combustion engine, but we believe that as we're going to be an important player in historic and classic vehicles, that this is a future-proof area of the business. So we're not embarrassed about that. It's obviously sensible for us as an oil company, but it's something that we're very keen to support, and the preservation of these cherished and very interesting vehicles we believe is super important. So some more pictures of some of the racing pedigree that we've got, literally bringing it a little bit further up to date, some of the Porsche Cup, some of the track racing that we've been associated with as really part of our DNA. So again, just trying to convey some of the racing pedigree that we've got. Bringing it up a little bit more to UK events and what we actually work with in the UK. You may have visited Goodwood Revival this year or Silverstone Classic. You would have seen we had a big presence in both of those events. You can see top left, a picture of us on our Motul garage in the High Street. We had some classic car, historic vehicles out the front. We had one of our restored trucks at a different location, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. We're heavily present at Silverstone Classic as well, with their main oil and lubricant partner as well as Goodwood. So we're trying to really commit to the historic and classic car world, and we think that's why a little bit of our partnership with the Federation will work so well, because we can really link all of those things up. One of the other assets that we had at both Goodwood and Silverstone was our classic mobile oil lab. So this was in the paddock at both Silverstone and at Goodwood. This was to support oil analysis for all the racing drivers and all the track eventers, so that they can have a quick health check on their engines pre or post race. It's a very quick sample that's taken, put through a spectrometer, and our chemist and engineer are there with their other equipment, and they give a very quick printed report that shows the health of the engine. Is there any metallic particles in there? Is it running hot, cold, etc.? So that's an added value that we do for the race events. It's something we're also going to roll out in 2022 as a service to all of the Federation members and their clubs. So as we go around and support trade events, which we'd love to do, and become involved in club events if you would permit us, we'll bring our mobile lab, and again, any of your members or your own vehicles, we can give a very quick analysis and an oil check and health check of the engine. So again, you can see the pictures, the bottom on your right. The bottom picture there, you'll see the two central characters. The lady in the red is Helene Zoll, that's our CEO and president and the owner, and her brother in the middle there in his Goodwood outfit. They're very passionate about classic and historic vehicles. They attend both Goodwood, Silverstone Classic and other UK events. This is the oil lab that I was talking about a little bit earlier. This is the mobile lab that we use in an historic vehicle. As you can see, our chemist and engineer are in there doing the analysis. This was at Goodwood this year, so it's something that seemed to go down very well at the paddock, and the race engineers, lots of people, almost all of the teams used it. We were able to then supply the correct oil, top up, or even some guys were actually changing their oil on the basis of the report. So it was a real added value to those at the paddock and the race events, and something that maybe an event that you hold that we could bring along and you could benefit from as well as a club. So again, we feel that it's not just about marketing and selling oils, it's about those added values and added benefits that we hopefully can bring to you. So from my side of things, I said I didn't want to bore you for too long. I would just like to conclude by saying that everyone at Motul is here to help serve the needs of the Federation and its members. We share your passion for these very special vehicles. We've created that community called Club Motul that we believe is going to give some real, actual, tangible benefits to you and your members. And as a part of the FHBVC, you're automatically can be enrolled in that with a very simple registration process. It's free to join for Federation, although there's a subscription charge for people that aren't in the Federation, so another benefit. And we will give you technical advice, technical support, and we really do believe this is an important sector for us, and we hope to speak to you in the coming months and years. So that's my plan.
Thank you, Callum. So that was quite a quick but comprehensive flavour. I'll come up here just so I'm on camera as well. Of the Motul offer. Certainly, Motul is the global lubricant partner of FIFA as well. But I think we're probably one of the first bigger federations to sort of take this on board and see what opportunities there are. I think from my perspective, I'll start you off with a question.
Fair enough.
This isn't rehearsed at all. You've talked quite a lot about wanting to ensure the availability of the right products for our vehicles. And would you like to engage with the historic vehicle clubs to identify what products they might need and fill some of those gaps that are there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very good point, David, and one that we've already recognised before we actually joined your association, that there are, if you go onto our website, we have an oil selector tool, and we know that the data on there isn't exactly right for the UK today, and indeed certainly not for historic vehicles. So we're already in a process that I've explained to you, that we're spending quite a lot of money to update our data. We're using Oil Slant in Germany and also a UK data company. So we'll definitely be able to improve the general oil selector tool by registration, make and model. When it comes to historic vehicles, there are so many variations and so many variables that sometimes if the steering system has changed or the gearbox has changed on a certain year, it can change the whole profile of the oil and the lubricants, the gear oil that's needed. So what we would ask is that once we've done the data process, the project that we're working on at the moment, if we could speak to some of the clubs and say to them, could you maybe check our data, just to check that the application and mapping is correct. Usually the clubs will know immediately if there's a variable because it's a hot topic. If you could help us with that, we'll update our system, and by way of a thank you, we would do a commercial offer with some oils to say thanks for helping us with our data. So that's something we would definitely do.
Okay, so this is going to be evolutionary over the next couple of years, because we're talking of a level of support that we've never experienced before. So, you know, please be patient, work with the guys. I've been working with them for a few months now. They're very approachable, right from the point of Helen, your president, you know, who was very charming when I met her. She actually talked about passion as being really important to her, and I referenced that in my press release, in our press release. So, are there any questions? Anyone? Oh, blimey, a hand. So we'll get a microphone. Just be patient, Anders. So this is Anders Ditlev Klaushager.
This is really a teaser question.
Okay.
That wonderful mobile oil laboratory.
Yes.
Which make of truck is it?
That's a very good. I know it's I think it's. I know I'm thinking of the one that we showed, and I do apologise, was from Goodwood 19. The one we're using is a Renault truck that we use.
It's a Renault, that's one.
So, yeah,
I thought it was right. I couldn't, to my shame, identify it.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
That's all right. No worries.
Cheers.
So I'm going to try and catch
Emma's
you.
behind you.
Oh, sorry.
Anyone else? Keith at the back. Oh, got you also over there. She needs some exercise. Right in that back corner, Emma.
A simple one. Do you have any contacts, either in Europe, in France, or in the UK, with the International Committee for the Conservation of Industrial Heritage, otherwise known as TICI?
Okay. The short answer is I don't think we do.
I'll talk to you later about it. It's probably
Okay,
easier.
yeah, no, I'd be happy to. We're certainly looking to expand our associations in the UK. We've joined the Independent Aftermarket Federation. We've joined the motorcycle governing body as well, federation. So it's something that we believe if we're going to operate in any of these markets, you have to put a bit back into your trade body and trade association. So please, yeah, I'd welcome the introduction.
Okay, good. Gentlemen, like you, Emma.
Yeah, thank you. Are we on?
Yes?
Yeah, good. Just two simple questions. What grade oil do they use in a modern Formula One car? I'm curious. And the second question, more relevant, is do you do the heat transfer oil used in cooling systems for cars?
We do certainly do the transfer oil. I'm sorry, I didn't get your first question. Could you repeat
What grade oil do they use in a Formula One car?
Very expensive, I know. We don't actually do Formula One oils yet. That's one of the race series. We do Le Mans, we do the MotoGP, we do various world endurance races. Got a list as long as you're armed of the races. We do support Paris, Dakar, more about endurance than speed in many cases. But Formula One, as you can imagine, when you have some of the giants, we're a family-owned company, we're a large company, but compared to, say, Petronas and some of the other players, obviously a lot smaller. But the oils that they provide, I honestly don't know. But you can bet your life it's going to be high-end.
Thank you. Right, John, from you're going to get a question about oils for steam and traction engines.
You beat me to it. The opposite end. This is the opposite of from Formula One. This is about as slow as you can go. The company's been around a long time, obviously. Did you ever do?
Whale oil.
Whale oil, yes. Yeah.
Don't say the last two words.
Did you ever do, and do you now do, steam oils?
We certainly did, and we do have it in our range.
Excellent.
So, yes, it was one of the first, actually. I was in 2 months whether to put it in my presentation. But, yeah, we did do, that was one of the first evolutions of oil that Swanfinch did. With the steam engines, that was obviously the introduction in terms of industry before it got into diesel and other fuel engines. So, yes, we do a range.
Because obviously we use a very high viscosity oil in the cylinders, so 600 grade to 1000 grade.
Yes.
And sort of 250 grade in the bearings. So
yeah, we do some in terms of oil and lubricants. We pretty well cover all of the markets from power generation right the way through to marine and all sorts of things. Obviously today talking more historic and classic vehicles, but yes, we do them for sure.
thank you.
Yeah, I think, that was actually quite an interesting point when, excuse me, I met a gentleman named Hugh Dowding, who's Vice President of Motul, English gentleman, and we were talking about greases, because some people in the room know I and my father before me have a massive heritage with Castrol, and we were talking about greases, and Hugh said to me, because he understands my background, and he said, we've got a portfolio of 152 greases available. And it was at that point that I suddenly made the connection that there are opportunities here, for example, with your requirements, actually to explore what's happening. So if you're interested, John, I'll put you in touch with Callum outside of the meeting and you can explore options. But that's exactly what we were looking for to make this viable.
Obviously, we don't know if anybody can hear me, but we have a member benefit scheme.
Yeah.
Trying to link up with something like this for our members of the National Corrosion Energy Trust would be a good thing to try to do.
Yeah.
Yes,
Just say it again, John.
Sorry, yes, we have a member benefit scheme within the NTET and trying to link up with something like this, where we can offer oils at possibly a preferential rate, and as you were saying, the trust itself can benefit from what did you call it, kickback or commission? Yeah, that would be an excellent idea.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely something we would be super motivated to do because then it works for everybody, and I think that's how it should work. So yeah, absolutely happy to do it.
Thank you.
So if you drop him a note after the session, I'll put you in touch with Callum. Okay. Anyone else? No, all done. Callum, well done. off the hook. You're going back to your stall, or are you going to stay?
Yeah, no, I will. I'll be here for the rest of the event outside.
Good. Okay, so anyone who'd like to go and chat to Callum and his colleague Terry, who's sitting patient over there, please come and see the guys.
Thank you.
So we've just got a short 2-minute interlude, which I'll endeavour to film, while the lapel microphone that Callum was wearing is transferred to Nigel, and he can come up and talk to you. Excuse me, just going off camera 1 second. I talked to you earlier about no need to take notes. So we've actually created an essential guide to fuels, which these are literally the first copies that are available. There's a box of them over there. And so when you leave, Emma, perhaps you can organise 1 or 2 of the guys on the doors and make sure you take a copy of this. So it saves you taking lots of notes and actually gives you a pretty valuable resource. One gentleman spoke this morning and talked about this matrix, which Nigel created, and which actually shows the filling stations of petroleum suppliers who have the super E5 protection grade product available. And I learned some names I didn't know. I've probably just stolen some of your thunder. But this is going to be a really useful document, and you're here. Away you go.
Probably you can hear me okay. I'm probably going to walk about a little bit, just so I can read the slides a bit better, okay, rather than doing it from here. Okay, so just a quick slide about me. 44 years experience in the oil industry, 35 years with the dark side, ExxonMobil, okay, which is Esso in Europe and UK and around the world. And obviously you're probably all familiar with Mobil. Exxon and Mobil merged back in 2000. Effectively, Exxon bought Mobil. So you see it branded as ExxonMobil now. But they sell around the world as Esso and Mobil, and in the States as Exxon and Mobil. I worked in the engine lab initially, fuels and lubricant testing, and then into fuels research and development as a diesel team leader at that time. And then became the Europe, Middle East and Africa refining product quality advisor. So I looked after 8 refineries in Europe on their fuel quality, basically handling their day-to-day problems and specification discussions. And I ended up actually as a senior fuels technical advisor for ExxonMobil Research and Engineering in Europe. And a lot of that work was involved with European committees on fuel quality, British standards in the UK. So during that time I was the convener of the diesel group and a member of the petrol specification group. I'm now still involved with British standards in their PTI2 fuels group. So we're still arguing about fuel quality every now and again, and doing our best to make sure that vehicles keep working okay. And I do a little bit of consulting, not so much now actually. When I left Exxon, I did about 3.5 years of extra work for them part-time, and I've done a little bit of work for Daimler-Benz on diesel fuel quality in the last couple of years. Yeah, I'm into old cars, had some old Range Rovers, and currently not so old, the Range Rover Sport and the XKR Jag, but they're just, I need something to tow my race car, and the Jaguar is just a bit of fun. I'm a big hill climber and member of quite a number of clubs. Used to run the old Rover Vitesse that I turbocharged and put a 4.6 litre V8 in it, so a Range Rover V8 in it. And now I run the TR7 V8 twin turbo hill climb car, which I crashed heavily last August an end-over-end roll. So just rebuilding it with a new shell at the moment, which is keeping me amused. But yeah, so keen on cars. So I guess the big thing that's been going on is ethanol, E10, we've had E5 before. This is all a result of EU legislation, basically, that got us there with the Renewable Energy Directive and the Fuels Quality Directive, and then the Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation in the UK, which is the legislation that forces the oil industry to blend biofuels. And if they don't blend them, they have to pay a buyout cost, which is quite expensive, and it wouldn't be viable to sell fuel. So they have to do it, okay? Have to meet the regulations. So this started with the introduction of E5, and that's been out there, for a good time now. It's been out there for over 10 years, and we've not really seen massive technical issues with it. I know people have reported odd problems, but generally E5 has not really caused massive issues. The ones that we have seen reported have really been down to poor fuel system condition, and also water ingress is one of the big issues. Okay, you've got to keep water away from ethanol blended fuels, because that's what promotes a lot of the corrosion and damage. So that's really is a key part of this. And so if the system's in good condition, well maintained, you shouldn't have a lot of problems with it. Okay? And that's really true to say on E5. There are aftermarket additives around, and they can help with corrosion protection. Some of them are claiming that they'll protect the whole fuel system. Hoses and everything, they won't. Okay? They will help with corrosion protection. They can't stop the ethanol molecule getting into the elastomers. So you need to make sure you have up-to-date material. So during that time, we've seen the 97 unleaded super grade and the 95 grade with E5, and now the 95 grade, of course, has gone to E10. Okay. During that time, there has been one supplier, Esso, who've supplied E0, and they do that to all their terminals that are supplied from Fawley Refinery. The Fawley Refinery in Southampton, they have a pipeline system that runs to Avonmouth in the west, it goes to London Heathrow, round to Purfleet on the east of London, and up to Birmingham. So that's an extensive pipeline system, so they pump the product from the refinery all the way to those terminals, and those terminals that then feed all the local service stations will have E0 Super. Outside of that area, then they have to buy it from others, and it will be E5. Okay, but if you're in those key areas, you're lucky you can actually still get E0. And the multi-product pipeline system, you pump petrol, diesel, jet fuel, they all go in one after another with no separation. Okay, it comes into the terminal and it's cut into the appropriate tankage, and the material that's contaminated between the grades is piped off to a separate tank. You watch it come in, they can see it come in with the electronic monitoring on the fuel quality, and they can put it in the right tanks. So, and then the material that can't be blended off at the terminal is trucked back to the refinery, thrown back into crude, and it goes back through the mill and comes out again. So you save the molecules, we just reprocess it. So that's just a little bit on multi-product pipelines that you may not have known anything about. So that's how they can distribute it around the country. So we've heard about this before. We were successful in lobbying the DFT and keeping the so-called protection grade, the E5 grade. It's there for at least 5 years, but I expect it will get extended for at least another 5 years beyond that, and maybe beyond that. Remember, the super grade is also sold for performance vehicles as well, and there's a lot of modern vehicles that are using the super grade. It's recommended in the handbooks of Porsches and various other high-performance cars. So the main user of the super grade is actually performance vehicles rather than classic vehicles. And of course, during the winter time, the sales to classic vehicle owners drops off an awful lot. So you can see that it's really the sports car folk that are keeping this thing going, which is good. So, as we said, corrosion and elastomer, flexible pipes, diaphragms, gaskets. is really the main sort of issues that we have to worry about with E10. And many pre-2000 vehicles are not compatible without fuel system modification. There are also a number of newer vehicles that can have problems as well, and these are some direct injection vehicles, mainly VW, Audis and Fords that use the same injection system. It's sensitive to E10, but they're all fine on E5. Just to show you a spec, this is what the gasoline specification for the UK looks like. This is the European BSEN 228 spec. The BS has just got the British standard add-on, if you like, to the annex to it, which puts in the super unleaded grade, and the specs are there. And you can see it's quite a complicated specification. The important thing to note on that is the oxygen content. I don't know whether you can read that, 2.7%. That's basically means it's E5. Ethanol contains about 35% oxygen. So petrol normally doesn't contain oxygen. You add the ethanol in, it brings 35% oxygen along, okay? And 5% blend with that 35% represents 2.7 in the final blend. If we look at the E10, it's another table in the spec. It's all pretty much the same, except for now, if you notice, the oxygen content's gone from 2.7 up to 3.7. Okay, so that defines it as E10. Now, some other things to know about E10. It's been the main grade of petrol in the US for many years, many years. Okay, so they got used to it. So everybody that's running equipment from the US, running carburetors from the US, for example, you should not be seeing any problems at all with running on E10. And in Europe, it's been the main grade since about 2010 in France and Germany. So it's been out there, it's in a number of countries now, and we're not really seeing massive problems. People are adapting to it, they're adjusting the vehicles, they're making the changes on flexible hoses, etc., and they seem to be able to live with it okay. I talked to Burn and Fuel Systems, and they do SUs, Zenith and Amel carburetors these days, and they've taken steps to try and make anything that they sell now compatible, so that includes some of the spare parts as well. So you can update your old equipment and get compatible parts, which is helpful. I put the bit in about lawnmowers, chainsaws and trimmers because everybody keeps asking that question. If it's older, it's probably not compatible. If it's modern, latest purchase, then it probably is. Otherwise, use the old Super E5 protection grade. You'll see the pumps labelled now. You see the two signs there, E10 and E5, so it should be nice and clear. The E10 sign means it's between 5.5% ethanol and 10%. It won't necessarily be 10% ethanol all the time. It depends on what the company's doing, how they're making the fuel, what the economics are, and that will drive them to be either down at the 5.5 or up at the 10 level. If it says E5, it can be between 0 and 5% ethanol. You'll also see modern vehicles will also have those same labels on the fuel filler cap. So when you open it up, it will say, if it says E10, fine, you're good to run it on E10. So ethanol, what is this ethanol that we're talking about? Well, it's derived from plants, including sugar beet, sugar cane, wheat. There are various sources for it. Okay, it's basically made by fermentation. So it's a classic alcohol production process, really. And probably you may say its best use would have been to keep it as a drink rather than putting it in cars. But it's there, it is renewable, and that's the big point about this. It's effectively kind of CO2 neutral, if you like. You grow it, it absorbs CO2, you burn it, it creates CO2. So it's good from that perspective. It's being done to reduce emissions, of course, and the government reckons it is equivalent to the output of about 350,000 cars by actually introducing it. So it's, it has some environmental credentials. Some other parts of the world, like South America, they use much higher levels of bioethanol. They have a big sugarcane operation out there, so it's a very effective means of making fuel, and that's been used quite successfully over many years at quite high levels as well. Okay, but they have made adaptation to the vehicles so they can cope with it. So, what are we worried about for historic and classic vehicles? Corrosion, tarnishing of metal components. The big one that's the major concern to me is elastomer compatibility, and here we're talking about fuel hoses, gasket seals, where they actually swell. The ethanol molecule is quite small and it will get into them and damage them if it's not compatible elastomer. The other thing it does is air-fuel ratio enleanment. I mentioned that ethanol is 35% oxygen. So when you blend it into gasoline, you've now got actually less hydrocarbon in there. Okay, you've got oxygen diluting it, and that's not a bad thing. But the energy content is slightly lower because the oxygen doesn't bring you any energy, and it also leans out the fuel system. So with E5, small change, you may have got away with not noticing that it went slightly lean. If you go to E10, you may well find that you start to see some operational difficulties, running hotter, maybe some stalling and stumbling because the mixture's not rich enough. You can correct it, you need to adjust the carburetor, rejet, whatever, to compensate for it. That's the ethanol specification, and I have had some questions in about people thinking that ethanol is a pure chemical. It's made by this fermentation process, and it brings along other contaminants with it, and it's slightly acidic. That's really what the main concern is with respect to corrosion. If it gets water with it, then it can really be quite corrosive. So that's something that we really have to be careful about. You'll also notice that it can have some methanol in it, quite high water content base case, although it's obviously diluted in the fuel. The other thing is it's got quite a high electrical conductivity. So one of the big problems that we do see with corrosion is it tends to be what we call galvanic corrosion. And this is when you've got dissimilar metals together in the fuel system that are some distance apart on the galvanic scale, and then you introduce some water and ethanol around, and you've really got then quite a corrosive situation. So that's why it's important to try and keep it as dry as possible. There are some other contaminants in there, chlorides, sulfates, etc., which also can cause operational difficulties, more in fuel injection systems though. What does it look like in terms of other characteristics? Well, we've got the research octane number and the motor octane numbers there for petrol and ethanol, and you can see ethanol is good octane. So one of the attractions of blending it is that you do get an octane boost. So that's helpful to the fuel blender. It makes it a bit cheaper to make the blend. If you look at the calorific value, that's just highlighting the fact that it contains quite a lot of oxygen. You see it's quite a bit less. From a vapor pressure perspective, it's quite low, so volatility, the thing that causes you vapor lock, it's quite good from that point of view until you blend it with petrol. And then when it blends with petrol, it has an odd, it's called an azeotropic effect. And what it does is it increases the vapor pressure of the petrol. So it can promote more vapor locking. However, that's corrected because the base petrol now is a lower vapor pressure petrol. So when it sees the ethanol, it doesn't have a vapor pressure that's any higher than what you're used to. Okay, so I think a lot of the earlier questions about ethanol were, well, it's going to cause more vapor lock. No, it shouldn't do because the base petrol is corrected to offset it. So what about actually blending it? What would be best? Well, generally, the oil industry prefers to do things at the refinery because you've got very good control there. And because ethanol's impact on the fuel quality is variable, it depends on the base quality of the petrol. Now, not every tank of petrol is the same. Crude oil changes all the time. Different crudes from around the world are blended in the refinery. Every day, the tank of petrol that's made is slightly different. It meets the specification, but it's slightly different. And that's just a natural variation of it. It's a natural product, if you like, so it will vary. And its response to ethanol also changes. So you have to be very careful about making sure that you control it to meet the specification. So what you do is you make a special blend stock in the refinery. It's called the BOB, the blend stock for oxygenate blending, and ethanol is called an oxygenate because of the high oxygen content. So ideally you would sort it all out in the refinery. Unfortunately, you can't put ethanol containing petrol through the multi-product pipelines because there are concerns about the large volumes of what we call the low flash interface, and this is low flash point material that would be diesel-petrol mix. You've got to do something with that. Well, you can't take it back to the refinery and throw it back into the crude now because it upsets all the water oil separator systems. Because of ethanol's love of water, it disables those systems. So you really, putting it in the pipeline system would not be easy to do and could cause problems. The other big issue is disabling jet fuel coalesces by water contamination. And jet fuel goes up those pipelines as well, and we're very careful about what you put ahead of the jet fuel so it doesn't contaminate the jet or damage it in any other way, because jet fuel obviously is critical. You know, there's no laybys in the sky, as we say. So, you know, if it breaks down, you're killing people. So you've got to be very, very careful about jet. So the rules are very strict around jet. So it was decided not to blend it at the refinery, not to put ethanol in petrol at the refinery, but to do it in terminals. So it adds cost. Wasn't the preferred option, but it's the lowest risk, and that's what the industry has done. So we can do it, and it happens. This is what it looks like. So from the refinery end, you can see the component tanks on the left of the refinery. You've got a recipe of what you have, how you need to put those component tanks together to make the refinery tank and BOB, the base petrol. You analyse it while you're making it. You analyse it online. We run knock engines 24 hours a day, 10 minutes on the production as it's coming off and 10 minutes off on a reference field. And they do that for all the key measurements while the tank's being made. And so they know at the end of the production exactly what the tank quality is. You take samples as well, the other side of that, and run them through the lab and check. You have to get samples of the ethanol from the terminals, because that's where you store the ethanol now. Get them back to the lab at the refinery to check that when it's blended with the BOB, it comes on grade, it tests on grade. So you can see there's quite a lot of extra work messing around trying to get this right. So a lot of effort goes into blending it, making sure it's right at the service sections. So as I said, they were the three key areas that we're worrying about with petrol ethanol blends. I mentioned the increased acidity, conductivity, inorganic chloride content, but they are controlled, and every effort is made to make sure that the fuel is of good quality. The corrosion inhibitor additives have been proved to be effective, actually, in helping to control corrosion. And remember, the oil company has to buy ethanol and store it in steel tanks. So that that's often treated with a corrosion inhibitor base case, because it can cause quite a lot of damage to steel tanks if it's not treated with a corrosion inhibitor. So that's going on anyway. Certainly what we've seen in the Federation is the aftermarket ethanol corrosion additives that were tested a few years ago all worked pretty well. So they did offer some protection, and usually they're combined with a valve recession additive. So something to lubricate the valve seats as well. So you often see that. There's no harm in putting that in, even if you don't need it to lubricate the valve seats. But what you need is the corrosion protection, which is good. I mentioned galvanic corrosion, and that's why the conductivity is important. Modern petrol has a very low conductivity typically, and whereas ethanol has a very high conductivity, and that obviously promotes the corrosion process. Modern petrol is severely hydrotreated to take the sulphur out, If you notice these days, when did you last change an exhaust system on a car? Have you noticed how they last these days? It's because the sulphur content in the petrol has come down. The sulphur used to form sulphuric acid in the exhaust system, which corroded your exhaust system away. Now we've gone from probably 800, 1,000 parts per million of sulphur, it's now 10 parts per million. So it's trace contamination levels these days. Okay? And that's done by hydrotreating. And that also takes out some other materials, these trace polar species and ionic contaminants that add to conductivity. So base petrol is very low conductivity these days until you add the ethanol in, of course. We also find that many petrols these days have detergent additives in, and the detergent additives add a bit of conductivity as well, which is it's sort of a double-edged sword. It's not a bad thing, because it limits the risk of static ignitions when you're filling the car up. And you need to be careful about that always. You can have an explosive mixture around the filler neck of the vehicle, and if there's any static build-up, you can get a spark and a fire. It won't set the fuel tank on fire because it's too rich. Okay? But you can get issues, so you have to be careful. That's why it's always important, fill your fuel cans on the floor in the service station. Do not fill them in the vehicle, because they're insulated from the ground. Service station forecourts are very conductive, and they're done deliberately so that it earths any containers. So always remember that's an important thing to watch out for. Base petrol typically can contain about 60 ppm water. Beyond that, the water drops out, and that's typically at ambient temperatures. If you add ethers, and ethers were added to petrol, they've been added for many years as octane boosters, they're also another oxygenate, but they don't have quite the water affinity of ethanol, and they don't have the corrosion issues. But then, if you've got ethers around, you can see 400 parts per million. It's not unusual, water in the fuel. It's okay, it's not a problem. When you put in the ethanol, you can get up to about 2,500 ppm of water. Go beyond that, and then the ethanol partitions into the water, and it will drop out, basically. So you'll end up with a petrol phase sitting on top of water and ethanol, which is obviously a very bad thing to happen, because you've then got quite a corrosive ethanol mixture in the bottom of the tank. You've also lost octane from the petrol phase as well, because the good ethanol octane is now down in the water. So avoiding that phase separation is critical. So the biggest thing here, I would say, is keep extraneous water out of your fuel system. Make sure the system's sound, it cannot get in through the filler cap, any other means of water ingress you must stop. If you do that, then the chances of having a lot of problems with corrosion are quite small. Service stations these days do not have a lot of problems with water contamination. When they do, it's obvious, because it stops a lot of cars very quickly. So it's pretty obvious something's gone wrong, and it's usually because of some maintenance issue, a local flood or something that's caused the problem. Since ethanol's been in the system for quite a while now, the service station tanks are pretty dry, because the ethanol's mopping up any water that's around all the time, and provided the levels are low, it just carries on through the fuel, the engine burns it, it just comes out as water vapour. There are no problems. Okay? So the key is, got to keep it dry. I put in some pictures from some work that was done in Australia by the Orbital engine company, and this is for the Australian government. You can see on these are various carburetor jets and components, and you can see they've got on the left-hand side just ordinary unleaded petrol, then an E5 blend, and then an E10. And you can see that you do start to see some increased corrosion. Now, these fuels for this work were done by just splash blending ethanol on top of ordinary petrol. So the blend wasn't adjusted to meet the specifications, but it was useful work. Materials-wise, in terms of compatibility, there were quite a number of things like cork, shellac, epoxy resins, and that's important for fiberglass tanks, by the way, that aren't compatible. But these have been replaced with more modern materials, basically, that are compatible. And funnily enough, very old leather gaskets and seals are resistant to ethanol. So sometimes old is not so bad. Because the ethanol molecule is smaller and more polar than the other petrol components, there's a low energy barrier to stop it that helps it diffuse into elastomer materials. And what will happen is when they see when a non-compatible hose sees an ethanol blend, it will take up the ethanol, and that will affect it. It will cause it to swell, soften, and it will damage its structure. So it can then dry out. When it dries out, it will crack and leak, or it can just leak when it's wet. And so you may actually see the fuel line sweating, if you like, as it starts to leak product. You may smell it as well. And also some fuel tank repair coatings have been found to break down. Now, personally, I would never put any of those sealants in a tank. If you've got a bad tank and it's leaking, take it out and fix it. That's the best thing to do. Get it repaired or have a new tank. Trying to put these sealants in is not a good idea because they will be dissolved by ethanol and they'll block filters and cause numerous other problems as well. So I really don't advise using anything, any kind of sealant in the fuel system. There's some examples of hoses from the Australian report, and you see the top one is just on ordinary unleaded petrol, then an E5 and an E10. And you can see how it started to affect it and distort it as the ethanols attacked it. Some other components, filters, plastic components will most likely change colour and they will absorb a bit of ethanol. The thing to watch out for is floats. If you've got plastic floats, then they can become heavier. So obviously that's going to upset the float level in the carburetor float chamber. So you need to be careful there. You may then run into some problems. So in those cases, it may well be better to go back to brass. We talked about element and the fact that ethanol's got 35% oxygen by weight in it. A lot of people say, oh, I put this in and my fuel economy is deteriorated by 10%, or, no, it's going to be about, versus no ethanol, it's going to be about 2.6% at worst, okay? So you shouldn't really see massive deterioration in fuel economy, but you will see increased fuel usage because it doesn't have as much energy in it. And that's just the science, if you like. And you could also run into problems with, drivability issues, so hesitations, a bit of a flat spot because it's leaned out a little bit, some stalling maybe, and it will also possibly run hotter. But you can counter that by adjusting the fuel mixture. It can be fixed, basically. And for a modern vehicle with a three-way catalyst on it and an oxygen sensor, the vehicle compensates automatically because it's just adjusting the mixture to stay chemically correct all the time for the catalyst to work properly. So there won't be any problem there. Modern vehicles learn the fuel as well as you drive along, and they update their main mapping as a result of the fuel that you're running. So if you have a big change in fuel quality, the car may not feel quite right initially afterwards, but over time, as it visits various speed and load points, it will correct itself and adjust the mixtures accordingly. And so the next time you start it up, it'll have an updated map of information, so the vehicle will run better from cold as well. So, yeah, crude oil-derived fossil fuels will continue to be available for many years to come, despite all the bad news and the fact that you won't be able to sell petrol and diesel vehicles beyond 2030 at the moment, shall we say, till the awful reality dawns on the politicians that this is going to be really tough to do. It's going to be around. We are going to have crude oil-derived fossil fuel out there for a long time to come yet. There is no current volume replacement for jet fuel. The latest assessments say by 2030, there might be 5% of it might be renewable, but that's all. It's tough to approve. There's not enough feedstock around to make it anyway. So, and if you're making jet, you're making petrol, you're making diesel, you're making gas oil, and you're making LPG and everything else. You can adjust the volumes at the edges, But if you're making jet, you have all these other come-along products. So what's going to happen to them? There's no hole in the ground to tip them back into. I mean, when they first refined petroleum, they used to refine it for the lamp oil. And everything else, they burnt the gasoline in pits, and the heavier product was put into town gas, hence the name gas oil. But so that's, you can't do that these days. It's got to get used somewhere, so it's going to be available. The other big deal is, what are we going to do about heavy duty? Off-road, emergency power generation, these all need high energy fuels, high energy density fuels, and they're liquid fuels. So you've got to keep those, and they'll still be needed. A battery tractor is not going to go very far, pulling a big plough. It's just not going to happen. Okay? It's going to stay diesel for the foreseeable future. Yes, maybe there'll be some hydrogen around, but you've got to make the hydrogen. And where are you going to make the hydrogen from? Well, you need renewable electricity. And when you look at that, it's about a 60% efficient process. So it's not a great way. You're using windmills to make electricity, which you could be using to drive other stuff, but then you're going to make hydrogen with it. Not sure that really all stacks up either, but we'll see what happens. The other thing is crude oil provides loads of feedstocks for other things and solvents, all the plastics. A modern electric vehicle is over 50% plastic. Where's that going to come from when there's no crude oil being refined? It has to be refined. You still have to do it. And it's not only the plastics, it's beautiful rubber for tyres, and it's all the solvents for paints and everything else and other industries that you still need. So nobody's actually looked at that. What worries me is the politicians think they can just turn the refineries off. You can't do that. It won't happen. The big deal in the future will be reducing the CO2 emissions by means of carbon capture and what we call sequestration, so putting it back in the ground, basically. So filling up those old oil wells with CO2. So for things like industrial plant, that's what will happen. And this will help the process because overall, hopefully, we can get to a balanced, neutral position by doing much more of this. But for the classic car and historic vehicle folk, what are we going to do? What we're going to see is probably more renewable content as we go forward. So, E20 is possible in the future, and we may well just have to get on and cope with it. But I think we can. I think we can make it work with the right materials, being careful about how we look after the vehicles. I think we can make it work. We've seen a lot about synthetic liquid fuels as well, and yes, they're possible. You can take CO2 out of the atmosphere. You can use renewable electricity to make hydrogen. You can combine the two. Those processes are well known. It's been done from coal and various other sources in the past. The technology is well understood, but it's not cheap. And the scale of it is difficult. I saw something the other day, and it was talking about a year's supply of fuel they thought in 5 years' time that they could make. It amounted to, I think it was about 3 months production by Fawley Refinery of petrol, globally. So that gives you an idea of the scale up of this would have to be huge. And somewhere like Fawley Refinery makes a tank, a 12 million litre tank of petrol every day. And that's just one of 6 refineries in the UK. So you get an idea of the scale of these things and what the alternatives are. Okay.
Wow.
Thank you. Sort of rushed through it.
That was a rush through.
Yeah.
A massive amount of content. And you can see now why we were so delighted to secure Nigel's services just a few months ago, because the timing was perfect. Actually, the connection to Nigel came through my contacts in UK Petroleum Industry Association. I made a call, and the gentleman I called said, I might just know someone. And he said yes, very, very quickly. We're incredibly fortunate to have Nigel as a member of the team. He's incredibly patient. I see most of the emails that come in when Emma shares them with the team to say, we've got this question, can you answer it? He's incredibly patient in answering questions. So this is an enormous asset. I don't know whether I dare even say, are there any questions?
Please stay.
I thought there might be. Come on, Ian, on your feet. Oh, you've delegated your job now. Yes, sir, got you.
Thank you. As a chemical engineer, I have thoroughly enjoyed that presentation. It was absolutely fascinating. We're all being sat there completely mesmerised and shut up and never said a word, so that just shows you the thing. Can I ask Mark to the FBHBC, are we going to get that presentation emailed out to the clubs? Because that is useful information that I would dearly like to put out to members through our magazine. Because one of the things that I've been, as a chemical engineer and actually a politician as well, I've been meeting on a regular basis with, there's two companies that were making the ethanol, one in Hull, which went bust because they were pestering the government for 3 or 4 years to actually change to E10 so that they could put theirs out. But the other one up in the northeast is actually a major manufacturer of the ethanol now, and actually there's a byproduct from that because they end up making animal feed. And I've lost 2 buddies at work where I work in West Yorkshire who've gone to work for that company. So thank you very much, and I really do think that was brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll pop that on another question, but got you at the moment. So. Let's do one over here for now. Come back to you, Sam. No. You're number 4. I've got number 3 here. Yeah, we'll give us a couple of days next week, and Emma will post that presentation on the website. So.
Right, okay. I'd like to congratulate you on the generic article that you put out in the previous newsletter. I think a lot of my members would be asking what specific of my components in my car are going to dislike this. I mean, I was talking to Mike about this just in lunchtime. I mean, we're obviously concerned with fuel pump diaphragms, but what about cupronickel pipes, which have been substituted for steel? Is copper pipe any different? And when you get to the really complicated things, I read in the Mercedes Gazette that they've sort of identified the Bosch K-tronic system, which was quite popular in early injected Mercedes, but there's also in Fords. So I'm reading it through Mercedes that this component could be completely stuffed basically by the fuel, but not having anything to do with Fords. So there you go.
I think one of the problems is that the work that's being done, if you look at that orbital report, for example, there was subsequently one done by Kinetic in the UK, which looked at a lot of the orbital information. And in some of that, their view, Kinetic at MOD basically, they noted that they were calling things severe corrosion that actually were very light corrosion. So I think that sort of added to this general feeling that it can be really bad. Yes, you'll get some tarnishing, but if you can keep the fuel system dry, you'll probably be okay. So, you know, my view would be give it a go. Okay, keep an eye on it, but give it a go on KJET. Copper, we never advise using copper for fuel systems. I know it's widely used, you see it everywhere, especially on old historic vehicles. Copper is a fantastic catalyst, and it causes the fuel to oxidise. Now, generally in a one-way circuit to a carburetor, it's okay because the fuel's getting burnt afterwards. If you've got any kind of recycle system with copper, then the fuel gets warm, it sees copper, goes back to the tank, and it will promote oxidation. So it's never good anyway. And obviously, copper and ethanol don't go together very well either. So Ideally, copper's not great. I think the cunifer type materials are much more tolerant, I think they're a good interim step. Ideally, stainless steel. I mean, the only thing that doesn't really get damaged at all is stainless steel.
Okay.
So, but obviously make sure it's a decent quality stainless steel, because of stainless steel and stainless steel. If it's Chinese stainless steel, it'll go rusty. Okay. I got a barbecue that's stainless steel from China and it's gone rusty. So, but it will do. So you've got to be careful about the grade of stainless that you're using. But I mean, if you're going to do it and you want to make it long lasting, then do it in stainless. It's not going to cost that much really. And then you've got a very robust system. Otherwise, the copper and nickel options are okay. The old tank coatings, what they called the turn coat, which was a tin lead coating on sort of classic fuel tanks, can be susceptible to corrosion. It's been replaced with a tin version, which is much better. But again, it will only corrode if you get it wet. If you can keep it dry and avoid the water ingress, then you can live with it. When it comes to laying the vehicle up, leave the tank with a good amount of fuel in it. There are various arguments about whether you should limit the amount of air that's in there, and yeah, that can help. But then, of course, you've got fuel that degrades and gets a bit stale. Basically, you lose the light ends, which help you start the car in the first place. So you need to refresh it with a bit of new fuel, usually, to get things moving again at the start of the season, if you like. So always leave a bit of room for that. Leave the rest of the fuel system wet with fuel, except for the carburettor. If you're going to leave it for a few months, drain the carburettor, or literally just if you can turn off the fuel and run it till the engine dies. That's a good way of doing it, and that will prevent you getting any corrosion in the carburettor.
Okay. Thank you, Nigel. This gentleman here, and then Sandy.
Yeah, I think you've partially answered my question in a way, but at least one company sells what they term storage grade fuel. Is it worth it, or?
Well, if it's an E0, then that's fine. If you happen to live in one of the distribution areas for ESSO, for their super, that's E0 anyway, so you won't have to pay an inflated cost for it. But yeah, the storage grade, typically it's E0 and it's got some more antioxidant in it, just to make it a bit more stable. But modern fuel is pretty stable these days. All the bad actors have been taken out of it with that severe hydrotreating to get the sulphur out. So it is pretty good.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Sandy.
Sandy Hamilton, Morris Minor, Owners Club. I've had several members contact me about one or two problems unrelated. Somebody said he's checking his engine this weekend and hoping to check the valves. Will there be any benefits from E10 with cleaner valves? And how about valve gaps? Larger, smaller, or just leave them the same?
Leave valve gaps first, leave it the same. If it's a non-modified head, so you've not put hardened valve seats in it, then you're obviously using an additive with it. Yeah, a valve recession additive, so just a lubricant for the valve seat. Leave it all alone, it should all be fine. Some years ago we were looking to try and evaluate detergents and their performance of keeping inlet valves clean particularly. One of the problems we had with the modern petrols is they actually don't make much in the way of deposits-based case these days, but all the good suppliers, the major oil company suppliers, all have strong detergent packages in there which will really help keep the valves clean. So you shouldn't see any performance problems, you shouldn't see any build-up of deposits on valves.
The second query was partly involved with this. It was somebody who's only got a small station near him which only stocks E10, so he's continuing to use an additive. And he said, will he use the same additive, or should he get E5 with a performance enhancer, or what should he do? Or E10 with a performance enhancer?
If he changes the elastomers, the flexible hoses, and any seals to a compatible material, then he can run E10 with a corrosion inhibitor additive with it. So something like the Miller's additive will be fine. Okay, and the Miller's one actually has an octane booster in it as well, and a valve seat lubrication additive. So that's one that's pretty solid to use actually, and will help reduce any corrosion. Use it, keep an eye on it, provided, as long as you're not in any fuel leaks, which is the flexible hose issue, then it's worthwhile giving it a go and keeping an eye on the carburettor. That's really where you're going to see problems if you do have any. You know, have whip the float chamber apart and have a look at it and see how it's looking. The problems will probably occur after it's laid up anyway. So if you drain it, as we've suggested, then you'll probably be okay.
He said he was using Miller's VSPE.
Yeah.
So continue.
Yeah. Continue to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. One last question.
Yeah, just to ask, you've been talking a lot about float chambers and that, which is excellent if you've got a carburetor system, but if it's fuel injected, are there any specifics that you could do with that to eliminate some of the problems? Or no?
Use corrosion inhibitor additives is a good idea, base case, because it'll help protect the petrol tank. Okay. Most fuel injection systems, sort of early and well up to fairly modern systems, already had an inline fuel pump where the copper commutator was completely submerged in petrol. I mean, it flows straight through it all. And we've never seen any problems with corrosion of those systems. They've been okay. So I think on fuel injection, you've probably got less concerns. But again, it's the same thing. Keep it dry. Absolutely keep it dry.
Okay. Right, one on this side, and that's it.
Just while you're getting the mic, I didn't talk about diesel today, but just for those that run historic diesel vehicles, we'll perhaps do that in the future.
Yes.
There is a lot going on in diesel, a lot of issues with biodiesel causing problems and off-road areas as well, filter blocking, stability issues with the biodiesel. So, and also poor quality Russian diesel coming in, which is contaminated with rust particles, which is damaging modern injection systems quite badly. It's like an abrasive paste in the fuel. So there are some sort of ongoing issues that we're fighting in BSI at the moment to try and improve. So just to let you know, that's kind of going on in the background.
Well, that's next chapter. That is to our book. So.
Okay, thanks. Really was a good speech, that. I'm Andy Lord from the Historic Commercial Vehicle Society. I was going to ask about diesel, but you've answered that. We understand that a number of Tesco fuel stations are selling E0 out of the E5 super pump. Is that correct?
Tesco won't guarantee to sell E0. If they pick it up from Esso, which they will do from certain terminals, then it will be E0. Now, you can do a bit of a test, okay, if you're up for doing a bit of bucket chemistry and you're careful. Because ethanol partitions to water, you can do a simple check. So if you get a measuring jug, 500 mils of the petrol, add 500 mils of water to it, mix it up, leave it to settle. The water will be on the bottom, the petrol will be on the top. If the water volume increases above 500 mils, then you know there's ethanol in it.
Very good.
Okay, because the ethanol will just partition to it. So it's a simple test. Okay, it's easier in a measuring cylinder. You can put some food dye into the water, so it shows the difference easier. But it's a good test, basically.
Do you have a list of the garages that actually receive the Foley petrol?
We know the terminals. The problem is that the distribution can get flexed a little bit depending on what's going on. But if you're near to one of those terminals, there's a good chance that it'll be E0 all the time. So.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully you live somewhere near Birmingham, Erdington Terminal, Avonmouth down near Bristol, Purfleet on the east of London, near Heathrow, West London Terminal. They all receive E0 from Fawley Refinery, Gatwick area, all that, and Hythe on the south coast, right next to the refinery. That's all E0.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. The Federation accepts no liability if you burn your house down while you're playing chemistry in your kitchen.
No, absolutely. So be careful about doing that, but it is a simple test.
Yeah.
And I think the overall message with ethanol is just be careful and keep an eye on it. And if you're doing quite a high mileage, then give it a go. Give E10 a go with the right elastomers and see how you go. Otherwise, if you're doing low mileage, just stick with the E5.
Okay, tour de force. Thank you very much, Nigel. That's brilliant. I'm sure you'd love to show your appreciation one more time. If you leave the room through, where's she going? Those doors, we've got these books for you to take away. There's a cup of tea waiting for you outside where you've got coffee this morning. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for your support. There was one or two good points made today about how we can help you to help communicate the work of the Federation. We will definitely pick up on those. So have a safe journey home. Hope you've enjoyed the day. Thank you.